Well, hello, and welcome to Wellness Wednesday, your dose of body mind medicine from Sarah Jane and Access Your True Nature. And today I want to speak to this very common thread that comes up in many conversations and in my sessions with my private clients, and that is to stop comparing your insides to somebody else's outsides, and to actually start to see that if you're feeling jealousy or envy or one of those other distracted implants that are keeping you playing a really small game, to know that it's healthy. It's healthy when it's not turned inwards. And I see a lot of people who come from traumatic childhood backgrounds, and they're comparing themselves to their peers who didn't live their life, just like you haven't lived my life, and I have no idea what your life looks like, but you didn't see me when I was broken and sobbing on a cold floor of a government mental hospital in Johannesburg, and you didn't see me, at my worst, and I didn't see you. I don't have any idea what you've been through. But I want you to just stop beating yourself up for not being further ahead in life or at the same level as your friends or your peers, because your journey is your journey. And there's only one of you. I mean, do you know how miraculous that is? The possibilities of all those chromosomes splitting to make you who you are. I mean, that is a miracle in itself. And, I know that it can be really painful when you're shooting yourself into playing a small game. And we do that in so many ways. I mean, these days with social media, you just have to look at the beautiful photoshopped images of people on Instagram, and looking at, people saying how lucky they are, that they're traveling the world and they're living their dream life. But you don't know. There are no overnight successes. It takes years and years of training daily, consistently showing up, picking yourself up when you have a setback or life throws you a curveball. And you've got to stop. I still find myself often going there. It's part of being human, that you need to really ask yourself, what is it that you need right now? What do you need right now to actually show up and give of your best? What do you need right now? Because need in the dictionary these days, there's like 23 definitions of need being a lack. And for me, the true definition of need is one of those words that we spell into being is, what is my heart desire? Where is my soul calling me? Where am I out of congruence with what I stand for? And I think as well, we have to look at not trying to make sense of things, because you can't make sense for psychological or analytical reasons of why you feel like crap. The crap will pass. Just because you're feeling like crap doesn't mean that you are crap. And I think that's where a lot of this is formed in early childhood, where we don't feel valued or we don't feel safe enough to express what our needs are. And oftentimes I see that pathological result of anger turned inward for such a long time that it becomes anxiety, it becomes depression. And I certainly suffered from that for many years of my life before I actually started to find a way through this and see the gift in all of it. So I think it's important again, and I know I've been in your feed a lot this week, and in your inbox if you're part of my tribe over at accessyourtruenature.com. But we need to really look at what childhood trauma really is, because for a lot of people, just trauma in itself, when we don't look at, again, the definition of trauma coming from the German word Traum, which means to dream into being. We are intelligent, very sensitive, innate beings. And we have this limbic system that's emotional, that's asking us to bring into being our dreams, to use our imagination, to bring in the things that we want and not go into the nightmare okay, which is a lot of what trauma is these days, of doing the same thing over and over again and trying to get a different result. So I think it's very misunderstood. And in my experience as a traumatologist, as somebody who really works at getting to the root cause of why you're feeling the way you're feeling and why your body is giving you the feedback that something's out of congruence and needs to have some loving attention, is that trauma by definition is an event or a series of events that occur. Often it's chronic, unpredictable, toxic stress. It's not always the big traumas, but it's the tiny little ones, right? It's being constantly criticized and being put down. It's being constantly told as a child that you're stupid, that you're never going to amount to anything. Where we develop all these attachment styles of coping because we just can't process, we can't metabolize the amount of emotional impact of all these daily events. So childhood trauma isn't only isolated. I think you can sort of more easily pinpoint events, you know, like I said, those big traumas like kidnapping or a car crash or death of a loved one or sexual abuse or surgery or just physical violence, right? Or emotional neglect. And I say only because I don't want you to think that I'm diminishing any of those events in the slightest, but rather instead I want to really highlight, before we get into this comparison trap that's part of this, right? It's a response to not feeling valued, is that yes, childhood trauma can involve more complex, protracted, less easily pinpointable traumas that come in the form, as I said, of repeated, persistent, prolonged events like chronic, unpredictable, toxic stress. That does involve physical, emotional, or mental neglect or abandonment or abuse. More often by our caregivers, our primary caregivers, and it imprints on our nervous system for a 7-year-old. You know, I would go as far as to say that first 3 years, including the 9 months from conception to your birth, where you were picking up the stresses of your parents, your mother and father, you know, and how they were feeling, how safe they were feeling, how connected they were feeling to each other. But if I just sort of look at an example of, you know, that parenting that's consistently, as I said, made you feel physically and psychologically unsafe. Things like chronic poverty or being abandoned by a parental figure, not because they were trying to do harm, but just because they were so involved in their own stress responses that they weren't present for you. And that sort of perpetual emotional, mental, and physical boundary crossing that happens when we start going to school, right? That happens with guardians and coaches and mentors and grandparents and churches and all the other sort of social and cultural environments that shape us. Because we're like little sponges when we're little, you know, we don't know anything other than being empathic and feeling like it is personal. And that plays a huge impact on childhood trauma, which is why I'm going to be doing a free webinar on Friday. And I'll post the links to join that below, because I want to give you some really tangible, pragmatic ways that you can start working with trauma. And grow your child parts up, because it can have very profound effects on the psyche and the early development of you as a child, right? Who undergoes any kind of toxic stress, especially when, as I said, your parental figures or authorities or caregivers are the perpetrators. And you can't run, you can't fight, so you kind of go into this free state. And oftentimes it shows up only 20, 30 years later, when you kind of wonder why you feel unfulfilled, why you keep creating the same narcissistic relationships, for example, or you can't ask for a raise and you can't speak up and you can't ask for what you need, and you just basically feel like you can't even trust your own body to keep you safe, and how you need to come back to the body and create safety there before you can actually start doing the other work. And why a lot of times, you know, you could be doing everything right. You do your lifestyle changes, you're meditating, you're getting support, and still you feel stuck in a life that you're not living. And as I said, that a lot of these are not limited to, but some of the impacts are loss of safety and trust. You don't trust and believe in yourself. You don't believe you have any value. Especially, as I said, if your parents, if they were the abusers, but also a loss of safety and trust in the world. You believe the world is a dangerous, scary place, that you're always protecting or defending yourself, and how we set that up from the attachment patterns to just keep ourselves alive and create some semblance of normalcy in all the insanity that's happening around you. And it does affect your relationships, because you can't trust yourself to create safety because you can't see your value. So there's a lot of loss of safety and distrust in relationships in general, and that goes across everything, including your relationship with money. A lot of times in sleep, I'm hearing from my clients now, especially with this sort of latest surge and up level in the collective consciousness, that they're starting to have flashbacks or reenactments. Oh, I'm so sorry. I have something stuck in my throat. I guess I need to stand in my truth and keep talking about this uncomfortable stuff. But if you have been sort of having acute memories of traumatic events, or disproportionate responses to triggering events that unconsciously are reminding you, or bringing you into situations where you're reenacting those past experiences in your life today, that's part of it. As I said, depression, anxiety, PTSD, OCD, ADHD, all of those labels are symptoms of unresolved childhood trauma. And it's just a coping mechanism, right? They're not disorders. They're actually abilities, right? They're showing you that, hey, there's a high level of anxiety and depression, or both, going on in your life right now. And we need to really find a loving space and someone that's, you know, experienced enough to hold that space for you to actually start changing and bringing back those fragmented parts and pieces of yourself, which is often in what we see in those sort of personality disorders. And what I talked about the other day as far as fragmenting, you know, dissociation is parts and pieces of you that are actually responding now in your adult body from the age that you were when you set up those coping mechanisms. And as I said, loss of self-worth is a big one, because the underlying belief system that's developing when you're a child is that you see yourself as unworthy, that you see yourself as that your needs are not important. Or you develop narcissistic tendencies where you have to be grandiose and you have to sort of be a bully, and keep some semblance of control in saying that you're better than others. And they're all just protective mechanisms. And you might see, you know, that if you have that sort of disorganized attachment, which a lot of my clients have, because I come from that, you know, having an alcoholic father that I could, you know, nothing was ever good enough. We often sort of pendulate between all of the attachment styles and those feeling states to compensate an absence of any kind of stability or normalcy. That kind of erodes your sense of self-worth as a child. And that also leads into this sort of heightened stress response, so this hyper-vigilant response where your nervous system is on all the time, or you're so numbed down, you're in that sort of freeze state where either you're jumping out of your skin or you just feel nothing. And that doesn't help your immune system, right? Your immune system becomes compromised because it's just depressed, because you have a dysregulated body system. Your amygdala is constantly firing, and there's all this neural pruning going on in your brain, pre-18-year-old, right? So by the time you actually reach adulthood, you know, your 30s, your 40s, you're wondering why you have brain fog, why you can't remember, or you're just not in any sort of state of being able to rest and digest or find peace and calm in your mind. So there's always a sort of loss of sense of self, that you don't even know who you are, right? And at your core, you are, and what your most basic needs are and what you might be, there's just this emptiness, right? There's this very false sense of self because you're still playing roles and you're still being busy, maybe being the people pleaser, maybe being the rescuer, or maybe playing into one of those other wounded child archetypes. In a way, you're trying to avoid the pain of actually getting curious to really explore what makes you happy. When were you last deeply happy? How do you play for the sake of play? A lot of my clients don't know how to play. I certainly couldn't do that until I started working through the layers and the layers of this. And of course, when we don't know any of that, we start using these distorted coping mechanisms, or what I call limiting beliefs. Are not limiting, they're protective beliefs that you set up as a way to defend or protect yourself. And they become very OCD or ADHD, or they're the perfectionism, right? They're compulsive. And this shows up in eating disorders or substance abuse, or sort of repetitive behaviors like anaerobic nervosa. It's actually a thing where you just exercise too much. I know that one. In my 20s, I was like kind of gymming twice a day and riding my bike and running 10Ks all in one day and doing it day in and day out. Some people find comfort in shopping, or gambling, or sex, or gaming. Anything that's an ism is there, including workaholism, to help you to cope with that sort of intolerable feeling of loneliness or emptiness, or just not being able to love yourself. There's just no emotional response whatsoever. And of course, it's all a reaction. It's a response to defending and protecting your child parts at the age that you were when those traumatic experiences happened, such as compulsive aggression responses or isolation tendencies. And, that's really just the tip of the iceberg. And I'm going to go really deeper into this in the webinar on Friday. But just know for now that it all impacts how you are now, and that you really need to lovingly and compassionately take responsibility. It's a heavy word because it feels like a burden. And where I kind of prefer to say where you're being complicit, right? To do the work. So just know, the playing field was never level to begin with, and none of it's your fault. And this is not about blaming and shaming your parents, but this is about really being willing to actually do the work, because that it's your birthright to thrive. It's your birthright to be loved and be able to receive love, and to live an abundant life, and have time freedom and money freedom, and call in loving relationships. So, it's, if you're here, you obviously have lived through a myriad of traumatic childhood experiences. And you've often had to deal with a host of complex and very painful issues and symptoms that perhaps your peers who didn't live through your childhood trauma, because no one had your parents and nobody chose to be you. But we've all been traumatized in one way or another, and it's the relationships that traumatize us, which is why the only way through it, to see the gift in all of it, is to create healthy, loving, compassionate, safe relationships. That's where the work happens. That's where we return to trust. So, from that kind of perspective, the proverbial playing field, it was, between all those sort of childhood traumas and those with non-traumatic childhoods. It's not about comparing that one trauma is worse or less important than the other. So you just cannot compare your experiences to somebody else, because it takes an enormous amount of life force energy, right? Prana, chi, whatever you want to call it. And it takes an incredible amount of time and brain energy, right? Resources from your brain and your nervous system to hopefully and ultimately heal from childhood trauma. So the good news is you created everything that you believe in your stories. So you're the one who gets to change that. And when you do that, not only do you heal, but you stop the progression of that intergenerational and familial trauma from coming into future generations that maybe haven't been born yet. So just know that if you've sort of spent a large portion of your life surviving, and then later coping with those sort of lingering impacts of unresolved childhood trauma, and you're now looking around at your peers and at your friends and at the people that maybe are your mentors or that you look up to, and you're getting jealous or upset because you feel like you should be further along, or it's not fair that they're where they're at. You don't know what it took them to get where they're at. Just as they don't know what you're dealing with now, which is why compassion and empathy is such a big part of healing, right? Forgiveness starts with you. So, I want you to just consider today that rather, or maybe a better comparison to make is to just know, jealousy, it's part of the human condition. And contrary to popular belief, I actually think that jealousy can be a great gift and a very important clue for us, because it can give us a clue towards our true desires. So instead of shaming or blaming yourself or going into judgment or making yourself wrong, when you do feel jealousy, I love to say, I'll have what she's having, right? Because then it's not a win-lose situation. It's not, if I have it, you can't have it. There's no amount of shine in the world, and we all need each other's gifts and capacities, because only we have what we have based on our experiences. So I just invite you to sort of just begin considering, just begin that gentle inquiry to, if you are feeling jealous and you have a little resentment coming up, just to look at, what is that bringing your attention toward? What is that emotion want you to be aware of? And that probably is somewhere where you feel like you've let yourself down, or you're not willing to ask for what you want. And possibly where you haven't yet been willing to commit to taking aligned action. So as counterintuitive as it may seem, I actually think that jealousy can give you incredible gifts to widen your perspective and actually just notice, what's working for me right now? How can I build on that? And I think it also gives us a beautiful opportunity to practice gratitude, to really be in active appreciation. If we could just untwist ourselves and disentangle ourselves from all the protective and defensive beliefs, right, of our thinking, and change our perception about the situation that you might be finding yourself in that's bringing up, this discomfort. This jealousy is universal. If you're human, you know what it feels like to have jealousy or envy. And it doesn't necessarily mean jealousy is a bad emotion. It's just an emotion. And it can provide us all with really important clues and information about what we want to bring more into our life. We know what we don't want. So what if we start focusing on what our true desires are, our heart core emotions are, and follow the breadcrumbs, turn our action there and then get into aligned action, right? Faith in action. Because I think jealousy also provides us with this opportunity to change our perception from what we think we lack, right, to what's actually going well in our lives. That active appreciation that we do on a Friday, right? Celebration Friday. What if you could do Friday every day? Because jealousy for me is always an opportunity to practice, to strengthen my gratitude muscle. And I think jealousy also affords us this ultimate personal growth opportunity. As I said, it's that chance. Hello, my dog. My dog's excited because my daughter's just come in. But to be with what is, and to allow ourselves to feel all our emotions, full spectrum of emotions, especially the uncomfortable ones, because that's how we expand our emotional congruence. So, what's really unhelpful is to have jealousy about things that you have no idea about when you look at other people's outsides, where you're comparing yourself to your insides to other people who perhaps didn't have the same early childhood disadvantages that you had. And while I don't think it's necessary, I don't think it's helpful to compare ourselves at all. If you're going to do it, and let's face it, we're all human, so we're all going to do it at some point. I think it makes much, much more sense to compare yourself either to, people who have some set of early childhood trauma and disadvantages as you. And this is not about going into the victimology of the Me Too movement, which I think did a lot of damage, not just to the feminine, but to the men who are trying to find their place in all of this as well. Or, better yet, you're comparing from 1 or 5 or 10 years ago. Because when we compare ourselves to people who've had that same sort of set of early childhood traumas or disadvantages, and you can think of your siblings or your peers or your parents who have a similar life story that you know well, we can really level that proverbial playing field a little bit. And of course, even if you had, the same childhood as your siblings, I see it with my 3 sisters that we all cope with trauma subjectively. We all have a totally different story about that. And I have the honor and the privilege of having a lot of clients that are twins. I have my own sister has twins, and they're completely different. And 2 of my best friends are both twins. And it's so fascinating when you start to unravel some of the stories and the perceptions, because we're all wired differently. So just be mindful of that, that we all have different outcomes based on our coping mechanisms, based on our attachment wounds, and based on our way of processing, which is never going to be the same as somebody else's way of processing or making meaning of anything. So, don't compare yourself to your past self from a place of judgment or regret. Go into that active appreciation of, wow, look how far I've come. Look how much I've learned. Go into gratitude for that. Reflect on your own growth and the progress that you've made, and use that as a benchmark. Not the achievements and the progress, of other people who you have no idea what their childhood experiences were. So, again, I want to just sort of close this in saying that it takes a tremendous amount of courage to face your childhood trauma. And when you can just start acknowledging the truth about the past, of how your past continues to act out in your present, then you can be willing to do the hard work of grieving. Darling, you do get to grieve. I talked about grief yesterday. You get to process, and you get to give yourself permission to pick yourself up and move forward in your life, to really brave the wilderness, as Brene Brown says. So overcoming childhood trauma, it's not easy, but it's doable. And I love that it's becoming a thing, that everybody's talking about trauma right now. And I kind of do and have had tinges of jealousy and envy that, people are just showing up and putting their shit out there. And I've been doing this consistently for the last 20 years. And there is a part of me, part of my childhood bits that want to be acknowledged, that want to be said, want to be told, hey, you're doing a good job. Even though people may have not recognized it, even though you might have felt alone in this. The gratitude for me is I did it for me. I did it anyway, right? And it was a daily practice. It still is. So some journal prompts for you today until we meet on Friday for the masterclass is, and I want you to write this down. So if you have a pen and paper, write this question down. And before you go to sleep tonight, perhaps meditate on this. Or ask for your ancestral helping spirits to show you, right? To give you the clear-sightedness, to open your intuitive capacity to turn that projector in the back of your brain on as the silent, compassionate, loving, safe witness. But ask yourself, where have I been complicit in creating the conditions in my life that I know and I say I don't want, but my actions are actually the opposite of what I want? And I use complicit rather than responsibility here, because I know that in my body that feels really, really heavy. It feels like a burden, that I'm sort of carrying this weight of my past on my shoulders. And it's not fair, to say that you're responsible for all the crap in your life. You did the best you could with what you had from the moment that you were born, right? And you didn't have words. So ask yourself these 4 questions, because they're really powerful and I use them daily. Ask yourself, what am I not saying that needs to be said? And that could be either to yourself, to your child parts, where you're reparenting and growing yourself up, or it could be to the people that you have relationships with, where you want to have relationships with and you're not, because you're not saying what needs to be said for fear of abandonment or rejection or judgment or whatever it is for you, right? Where you're comparing your insides to other people's outsides. So you go into projection as a way to protect, and then you make assumptions as a way to defend your sweet little heart. And the next question is, where am I not listening to my life? Those little intuitive nudges, those hits, the feedback your body's giving you all the time. So ask yourself, what am I saying that needs to be said? Or what am I not saying that needs to be said? That was the first one. And then the final one is, what am I saying, either to myself or to other people, that I'm not hearing, or that other people are not hearing? They're powerful questions. It'll save you years of therapy just to sit with those. So remember that a lot of time we ask or don't ask for what we want through our actions, not our words. And this is where, if we feel unheard, we start comparing and blaming and shaming ourselves and other people, right? Because we're hurting. And anger turned inward. If it wasn't safe for you to express anger in a healthy way, hello, my dog, as a child, you probably became a very anxious child, right? You had an avoidant attachment. You're always treading on eggshells. You turned anger inwards. And maybe that was migraines, or maybe that was leaky guts, or maybe that was biting your nails, or plucking your eyebrows, or some other obsessive compulsive order, right? There was order in the chaos. It's not a wrongness. So ask yourself, where do you need to speak up in your life? Where do you need to take a stand for your wounded child parts that you're growing up? And it takes time. It doesn't happen overnight. So give yourself time. Just give yourself time to give voice to your feelings, because it's going to lessen that power of anxiety and hopelessness and despair and grief. And it's not a spiritual bypass, but it'll allow yourself to give room for those feelings that make you feel hurt or scared, and put you, the safe adult that can be trusted, right, back into some semblance of control. That's how you calm down the amygdala. That's how you calm down that threat response. So just because you feel like crap doesn't mean you are crap. You are enough. You are fundamentally good. I have that written on a post-it. I am a kind, loving person. And I'm doing the best that I can, because there's still parts of me that don't believe that I should be doing more, where I start comparing my insides to other people's outsides. Yes, we can always do more. Yes, we're growing. But that feeling like crap, it'll pass. And, it's part of the human condition, as I said, where struggle is universal, but you don't have to stay in that longer than necessary. It's part of this insane asylum we're all committed to that nobody knows it, called planet Earth. And it's the amusement ride of learning to be a good human. So remember, success is what happens after you survive your mistakes. And it's ongoing, right? We make mistakes and we get up and we learn from them and we grow and we evolve. And we do it over and over again. But it's no longer a pattern repeat thing, right? It's called human evolution. It's about listening to your soul, and loving the parts of you that you've deemed unlovable. So if nobody told you today, I see you, I love you, I honor you in your journey, and I will hold that loving space for you until you're ready to take back your power and claim that you are the most beautiful, embodied love warrior that's out there. Your animals know it. Your loved ones know it. Thank you for the hearts. Thank you for the love. I love you, Alan. All right. I'll see you on Friday. And if this was helpful, if you have any insights, if you have any wisdom to impart and share, please do. I'm constantly learning. And I wouldn't be where I am without you, to show me the parts of me that I couldn't receive as a moment-to-moment evolution of my own growth. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Have a beautiful Wednesday wherever you are. And I'll see you soon. All right, take care. Bye. Mwah.